My sister announced that she was pregnant for the seventh time, and I was so fed up with raising her kids for her that I finally said no. So I left. But she called the police to arrest me, and this is what happened. I stood on the front porch of my townhouse in Buckhead, the red and blue lights of the police cruiser reflecting off the pristine windows of the home I had worked 15 years to afford. The metal cuffs were cold against my wrists, biting into my skin as the officer recited my rights. I am Ebony, 32 years old, a forensic accountant who spends her days tracking down hidden assets and exposing corporate fraud. I deal in facts, in hard numbers, and in irrefutable evidence. But as I looked past the officer's shoulder, I realized that in the court of family drama, facts do not matter. My sister Latoya was standing by her beat-up minivan, sobbing into the chest of her husband Kyle. She looked like the picture of a devastated mother clutching her baby bump, while her 6 other children watched with wide, confused eyes from the back seat. "He is a monster," Latoya wailed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She left my babies out in the heat. She tried to kill them." The neighbors were coming out of their houses now, phones raised, recording the downfall of the successful, arrogant woman in Unit 4B. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that I was the one who paid for the minivan they were leaning on. I was the one who bought the clothes on those children's backs. But I stayed silent. I knew that anything I said right now would be used against me. Kyle looked up from comforting my sister, and for a split second the mask of the grieving father slipped. He smirked at me. It was a look of pure triumph. He thought he had won. He thought that by putting me in the back of a squad car, he could finally break the bank that was his sister-in-law. Before I tell you how a 4th of July barbecue ended with me facing a felony charge, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family bank account and were treated like the villain when you finally closed the vault. To understand why I was in handcuffs, we have to go back 48 hours to the 4th of July. The humid Atlanta air was thick enough to chew on as I pulled my Mercedes into the driveway of my mother's house. It was a modest ranch-style home in a neighborhood that had seen better days, the kind of place where the grass was always a little too long and the music a little too loud. As soon as I stepped out of the car, the chaos hit me. Screams, laughter, and the barking of a dog that sounded like it was losing its mind. I checked my reflection in the side mirror, smoothing down my linen dress. I had brought 3 bags of groceries, including premium steaks that cost more than my mother's weekly grocery budget, and gifts for all 6 of my nieces and nephews. I took a deep breath, put on my armor, and walked into the backyard. It was a sensory overload. My mother Joyce was by the grill, surrounded by smoke, looking exhausted as she flipped burgers. Latoya was sitting in the only lawn chair with a cushion, her feet propped up on a cooler, scrolling through her phone, while her 2-year-old tugged at her shirt for juice. And then there was Kyle. My brother-in-law was a 34-year-old aspiring artist who had been aspiring for a decade without ever selling a single painting. He was holding a beer, wearing a shirt that said "Good Vibes Only," and watching his children destroy my mother's flower bed without lifting a finger. "Auntie Ebony is here," one of the kids shouted. They swarmed me. I loved them, I really did, but I could see the neglect in their unwashed faces and the clothes that were 2 sizes too small. I handed out the toys I had bought, watching their faces light up, and felt a familiar pang of guilt. I was the one with the 6-figure salary, the investment portfolio, and the quiet, clean home. They were the ones struggling. That guilt was what they relied on. That guilt was their currency. The afternoon dragged on. I spent most of it helping my mother cook because Latoya was too tired and Kyle was too busy explaining his latest artistic vision to a cousin who clearly did not care. Finally, we all gathered around the picnic table. The food I had bought was devoured in minutes. I barely got a bite of the steak I had paid for, but I didn't complain. I was just checking the time, wondering how soon I could leave without causing a scene. Then Latoya tapped her fork against her glass. The sound cut through the chatter. She stood up, smoothing her dress over her stomach, beaming with a pride that seemed disconnected from her reality. Kyle stood up next to her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "We have some amazing news," Latoya announced, her voice pitching up an octave. The universe has blessed us again. Baby number 7 is on the way. Silence fell over the table. My mother gasped, clasping her hands together. Oh, praise God, a new blessing. The cousins offered polite congratulations. I sat there frozen. My forensic accountant brain immediately started running the numbers. They were already 3 months behind on rent. Kyle had not worked a steady job in 2 years. LaToya was living off state benefits and my handouts. Another child wasn't a blessing, it was a financial crisis. I did not clap. I took a sip of my iced tea, staring straight ahead. Kyle noticed. Of course he noticed. Ebony, you don't look happy for us, Kyle said, his voice loud enough to draw everyone's attention. This is a celebration of life. I'm happy if you're happy, Kyle, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Children are always a gift. But Kyle wasn't done. He exchanged a look with LaToya, a look I had seen before. It was the look of two con artists about to launch their pitch. Actually, Kyle continued, stepping away from the table to address the group like he was giving a keynote speech. With the new baby coming, we have been doing a lot of thinking about space. Our apartment is cramped. It is stifling the children's creativity. It is negative energy. He turned to face me directly. Ebony, we know you have that 3-bedroom condo in Buckhead. It is just you there. You are always working, so you hardly use the space. We think as a family it makes the most sense for us to swap. You can take our apartment. It is cozy, easier to maintain for a single woman, and we will move into the condo. The kids need the space to grow. It takes a village, right? I choked on my tea. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to laugh. Waiting for my mother to tell him he was out of his mind. But my mother was looking down at her plate. LaToya was nodding vigorously. It would be so perfect, Ebony, LaToya chimed in. The schools in your district are so much better, and you always say you want the best for your nieces and nephews. Unless you lied about that. The audacity was breathtaking. They didn't want to borrow money. They wanted my home, my sanctuary, the place I had bought with my own money, my own credit, my own blood, sweat, and tears. No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Excuse me. Kyle's smile faltered. I said no. I repeated, standing up. I am not trading my $500,000 property for your rental apartment that smells like weed and mildew. Are you insane, Ebony? My mother snapped, slamming her hand on the table. Watch your tone. They are your family. They are in need. I looked at my mother, the woman who had taught me to work hard, now defending the very people who refused to work at all. Mom, do you know how much I gave them last year? I asked, my voice rising. I pulled out my phone. I didn't need to open the banking app, I knew the numbers by heart. Tuition for the twins, dental work for Jaden, the car note on that minivan, groceries every week. I have spent $200,000 on this family in 5 years. $200,000, and now you want my house. That is just money. Ebony, Kyle shouted, his face turning red. You are obsessed with money. You are a capitalist robot. You don't understand love. You don't understand community. We are asking for support, and you are throwing receipts in our faces. I am throwing reality in your face, I shot back. You are pregnant with a 7th child you cannot afford. You don't need a bigger house, Kyle. You need a job. The slap didn't come from a hand, it came from my mother's words. You are selfish, Ebony, she hissed. You have always been cold. Your sister is bringing life into this world, and you are worried about your precious hardwood floors. I am ashamed of you. I grabbed my purse. I was shaking, not with fear, but with a rage so hot it felt like it was burning my skin. Fine, I said. If I am so selfish, then I am done. No more tuition, no more car payments, no more groceries. Figure it out yourselves. I turned to leave, walking past the stunned, silent cousins. As I reached the gate, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Kyle. He wasn't smiling anymore. His eyes were dark, and he leaned in close, so close I could smell the cheap beer on his breath. You think you can just cut us off? He whispered, his voice low and menacing. You think you can shame us like that? You don't know how the world works, Ebony. You think your money protects you, but the law protects the vulnerable. If you won't give us what we need, we will take it. And you won't even see it coming. I yanked my arm away and drove home thinking it was just the empty threat of a desperate man. I didn't know that he had already set the trap. I didn't know that in 48 hours his threat would turn into a 911 call that would change my life forever. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my home office, casting long shadows across my mahogany desk. I wrapped my hands around a mug of black coffee, trying to inhale the calm before the storm of my workday began. It was Tuesday, the day of the quarterly audit presentation for my biggest client. I had spent weeks preparing for this meeting. My suit was pressed, my forensic reports were bound in leather folders, and my mind was sharpened to a razor edge. After the disaster at the barbecue 48 hours ago, I had thrown myself into my work with a desperate intensity. Work was safe. Numbers were safe. They did not guilt-trip you. They did not demand you give up your home for them. I took a sip of coffee, checking the time on my phone. 7:30 in the morning. I had exactly 1 hour before I needed to leave for downtown. Then, the silence of my sanctuary was shattered. My phone buzzed violently on the desk. It was a notification from my front door security camera. Motion detected. I frowned. I was not expecting a package, and my cleaning lady came on Thursdays. I tapped the screen to open the live feed and my blood ran cold. A battered, rust-colored minivan was idling crookedly in my driveway. I knew that van. I knew the dent in the rear bumper from when Kyle backed into a pole because he was distracted by a podcast. I knew the screeching sound of the sliding door opening even through the tinny speaker of my phone. It was LaToya. I watched in horror as the side door flew open. It was like a clown car of chaos. Children started spilling out onto my pristine concrete driveway. First came Jaden, the 10-year-old, looking sleepy and disheveled in a stained t-shirt. Then the twins Maya and Kai shoving each other. Then the younger one stumbling out into the bright morning light. And finally LaToya pulled the toddler Zion out of his car seat and set him on the pavement. He was crying, rubbing his eyes with chubby fists. "What is she doing?" I whispered to the empty room. LaToya moved with a speed I had never seen her use for anything involving actual work. She didn't walk the kids to the door. She didn't ring the bell. She simply pointed at my front porch, shouted something I couldn't hear, and jumped back into the driver's seat. "No, no, no, no." I sprinted from my office, my heels clicking frantically on the hardwood floor. I reached the foyer just as I heard the minivan's engine rev. I threw open the front door, but I was too late. The minivan was already peeling out of the driveway, leaving a cloud of exhaust fumes in the humid Atlanta air. "LaToya," I screamed, running a few steps onto the porch. "Come back here." But she didn't look back. The van turned the corner and disappeared. I stood there stunned, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked down. 6 children were standing in my driveway looking up at me with a mixture of confusion and fear. Jaden was holding a piece of notebook paper. He walked up the steps slowly and handed it to me without a word. My hands shook as I unfolded the note. It was written in LaToya's loopy, childish handwriting. "Hey sis, Kyle and I are burnt out. The negativity from the BBQ was too much for the baby, so we are going on a baby moon to Savannah for a week to reconnect and heal our aura. Since you have so much space and money, we know the kids are safe with you. Don't be mad. It takes a village. Love, Toya." I stared at the paper. A baby moon. They had dumped 6 children with no notice. No car seats, no clothes bags, and no food so they could go on a vacation they couldn't afford. The audacity was so physical it felt like a punch to the gut. Auntie Ebony Maya tugged on my skirt. "I'm hungry." I looked down at them. They were innocent in this. They were victims of their parents' narcissism. My instinct, my deep biological instinct, was to usher them inside, to cook them breakfast, to turn on cartoons and let them feel safe. But then my forensic brain kicked in. The part of me that knew the law. If I brought them inside, I accepted care. If I accepted care, I became the default guardian. LaToya knew this. Kyle knew this. If I missed my meeting today to watch them, I would lose my client. If I lost my client, I might lose my partnership track. And if I kept them for a week, what would stop them from doing this again? What would stop them from claiming I had kidnapped them later if I tried to set boundaries? Or worse, if one of them got hurt in my non-child-proofed house, Kyle would sue me for negligence faster than I could blink. This was a trap. A calculated malicious trap, designed to force me into the role they wanted me to play. The role of the ATM. The role of the nanny. I cannot do this, I whispered. I looked at Jaden. Jaden, listen to me. I need you all to sit on the porch swing. Right here. Do not move. Do not go into the street. Are we staying with you? He asked, his eyes full of hope that broke my heart. I have to make a phone call, I said, dodging the question. I stepped back inside and closed the door. I locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home felt like a betrayal, but I knew it was survival. I leaned my back against the heavy wood sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. I could hear Zion crying on the other side. Every sob was a knife in my chest. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Latoya's number, but I knew she wouldn't answer. I called my mother. It went straight to voicemail. Of course, they were all in on it. I had only one option left. An option that would burn the bridge forever. An option that would make me the villain in the family story for the rest of time. But I had to protect myself. I had to protect my career. And in a twisted way, I had to protect those kids from parents who treated them like pawns. I dialed the number for Child Protective Services. Yes, I need to report an abandonment, I said, my voice trembling. My sister just dropped 6 minors at my residence without my consent and left the state. No, I cannot take custody. I am leaving for work. They are unsupervised outside. The operator asked for details. I gave them. Names, ages, the license plate of the van. When I hung up, I felt sick. I felt like a traitor. I checked the camera feed again. The kids were sitting on the porch swing looking terrified. Neighbors were starting to slow down as they drove by. Mrs. Higgins across the street was peering through her curtains. I paced the hallway. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I couldn't leave for work, obviously. I couldn't drive my car out of the garage without hitting a child. I was trapped in my own home. Then I heard sirens. Relief washed over me. Finally, the authorities would come. They would contact Latoya. They would force her to come back. They would see that this was unacceptable. I stood up, straightening my blazer. I prepared a speech in my head about boundaries and legal guardianship. I unlocked the door and stepped out onto the porch. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of my house. But they didn't pull up gently. They swerved to block the driveway. Doors flew open. Officers spilled out, hands resting on their holsters. The sound of heavy boots on my wooden porch steps echoed like gunshots in the quiet morning air. I stood frozen, my hands raised slightly in a gesture of surrender that felt completely foreign to me. I was a partner at a top-tier accounting firm. I was a homeowner. I was a law-abiding citizen. Yet as the 2 officers advanced on me, hands hovering over their holsters, I felt the unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. I was no longer Ebony Wilson, the respected professional. I was a suspect. Officer, please, you have to listen to me, I pleaded, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to remain calm. I am the one who called you. My sister abandoned these children here. I have a meeting. I cannot take them in. The taller officer whose name tag read Miller didn't even blink. He looked past me at the 6 terrified children huddled on the porch swing. Zion was wailing now, a high-pitched scream that grated on the nerves. The officer turned back to me, his eyes cold and hard. We got a call about a hysterical woman screaming at children and refusing them water in 90-degree heat, he said, his voice flat. And looking at you, ma'am, you seem pretty agitated. Before I could respond, the screech of tires tore through the neighborhood. My stomach dropped. The rusty minivan had returned. It swerved erratically into the driveway, nearly clipping the police cruiser. The door flew open before the vehicle had even come to a complete stop. My babies! Oh God, my babies! LaToya burst out of the car. Her performance was instantaneous and terrifyingly convincing. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her makeup in messy streaks. She ran past the officers, throwing herself onto the porch steps, gathering the children into her arms, like a mother hen protecting her chicks from a predator. Are you okay? Did she hurt you? Did she hit you? LaToya cried loudly enough for Mrs. Higgins across the street to hear clearly. Then came Kyle. He stepped out of the driver's seat, not running, but walking with a slow, seething swagger. He adjusted his good vibes only t-shirt and shook his head, looking at the officers with a mix of exhaustion and righteous indignation. Officer, thank God you are here, Kyle said, his voice smooth as silk. We didn't want to involve the law. We really didn't. But when she locked them out, when she sent that text, Kyle stopped looking at me with eyes that were devoid of any soul. What text? I demanded, stepping forward. I never sent you a text. I called CPS. Kyle sighed, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his cracked iPhone. He tapped the screen a few times and then held it out to Officer Miller. We asked her yesterday if she could watch them, Kyle explained, acting the part of the weary, responsible father. We have a medical emergency. LaToya is having complications with the pregnancy. We need to go to the specialist in Savannah. Ebony agreed. She said, bring them over. Look. I strained to see the phone, but the officer blocked my view. He took the device, squinting at the screen. I watched his jaw tighten. It says right here, Officer Miller read aloud. Sure, bring the brats over. I will watch them, but don't expect me to feed them. My blood ran cold. That was a lie. A fabrication. A digital forgery. That is not real, I shouted, panic finally clawing its way up my throat. Check the timestamp. Check the server data. He spoofed that number. I never sent that. Ma'am, step back, the second officer barked, putting a hand on my chest and shoving me backward. Officer Kyle continued pressing his advantage. She has been unstable lately. The stress of her job, the loneliness. We thought helping with family would be good for her, but when we dropped them off, she just snapped. She started screaming that she hates kids. She locked the door. We were just driving around the block to calm down when we saw the police lights. Thank God you came before she did something worse. It was a masterclass in manipulation. In under 2 minutes, Kyle had painted me as the villain in my own driveway. He used the prejudices of the world against me. The angry, lonely, childless career woman versus the struggling, loving parents. Officer Miller looked from the sobbing LaToya, who was now rocking Zion, back and forth to Kyle, who looked like a concerned dad, and finally, to me. He made his decision. Ebony Wilson, turn around and place your hands behind your back. No, this is a mistake. You can't do this, I protested, but he spun me around with force. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists, sending a shockwave of reality through my body. Click, click. The sound was final. It was the sound of my life shattering. As they marched me down the front walk, I looked up. The neighborhood had come alive. Curtains were twitching. People were standing on their lawns. Mrs. Higgins was holding her phone up, recording everything. I could see the red light blinking. I was being paraded like a criminal in front of the very people I had tried so hard to impress with my quiet dignity. I looked at the minivan. Kyle was standing by the open door. He wasn't looking at the police. He was looking at me. And for a brief second, the concerned father act dropped. He smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a predator's grin. He mouthed 2 words to me. Pay up. I was shoved into the back of the police cruiser. The hard plastic seat was uncomfortable, the air stale with the smell of old sweat and disinfectant. I watched through the plexiglass partition as the female officer spoke gently to LaToya, handing her a bottle of water. They were treating her like a victim. They were treating my abusers like heroes. The ride to the station was a blur of nausea and disbelief. I sat in silence staring at the metal grate separating me from the officers. My mind raced. How did he fake the text so quickly? How long had they planned this? This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a calculated strike. They knew exactly how the police would react. They weaponized the system against me. At the precinct, the humiliation continued. I was stripped of my blazer. My jewelry was cataloged and put into a plastic bag. My purse, my phone, my dignity, all taken away. Stand here, look at the camera, turn to the left, turn to the right. The flash of the camera blinded me. I knew that photo would haunt me forever. The mugshot of Ebony Wilson. Hair disheveled from the struggle, eyes wide with shock. This image would be the first thing anyone saw when they Googled my name. I was led to a holding cell and the heavy door clanged shut. The room was cold, painted a depressing shade of gray. There was a metal bench bolted to the floor and a toilet in the corner with no seat. The smell of bleach and urine was overpowering. I sat on the bench pulling my knees to my chest, shivering despite the summer heat. In the corner of the holding area, mounted high on the wall behind a protective cage, was a small television tuned to the local news station. I stared at it blankly, trying to disassociate from my reality. The weatherman was talking about the heat wave. Then the breaking news banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. I squinted, and then I stopped breathing. There on the screen was my house. The camera was zoomed in on my front porch. And then my driver's license photo appeared next to a headline that made my heart stop. Buckhead businesswoman arrested for child endangerment. 6 children abandoned in heat wave. The news anchor, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair, began to speak. Shocking scenes in an upscale Atlanta neighborhood this morning as 32-year-old Ebony Wilson was taken into custody. Police say Wilson, a wealthy forensic accountant, locked her 6 nieces and nephews out of her home, leaving them without food or water in 90-degree temperatures, while their parents sought medical attention. Neighbors describe hearing screams for help. I stared at the screen, tears finally spilling over. They didn't just arrest me, they assassinated my character. Wealthy, cold, heartless. The narrative was set. Millions of people were watching this. My clients, my boss, my colleagues. I looked away from the TV, burying my face in my hands. I felt small. I felt destroyed. But beneath the despair, something else began to bubble up. It was cold. It was hard. It was the part of me that found hidden assets and exposed liars for a living. Kyle and LaToya had made one critical mistake. They thought they had buried me. But they forgot that I am a seed. They thought stripping me of my reputation would make me beg for mercy. They didn't realize that by taking everything from me, they had left me with nothing to lose. I lifted my head and looked at the cold concrete wall. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to think. I was going to calculate. And I was going to make sure that when I walked out of here, I would be bringing hell with me. Time does not pass normally in a holding cell. It drips. It crawls. It agonizingly stretches every second into an hour until you lose all concept of day or night. For 48 hours, I sat on a cold metal bench, staring at a concrete wall that was painted a shade of beige that looked like dirty dishwater. My expensive linen suit had been traded for a stiff, bright orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and someone else's sweat. The humiliation was physical. It sat on my skin like a film I could not wash off. But the silence was worse. In the silence, my mind replayed the look on Jaden's face as the police shoved me into the car. It replayed Kyle's smirk. It replayed the way my neighbor's people I had invited to holiday parties filmed my downfall with gleeful abandon. I was a partner at a forensic accounting firm. I spent my life finding the truth buried in numbers. I exposed CEOs who embezzled millions. I found hidden offshore accounts. I was the person people called when they wanted justice. And now, I was the criminal. The irony would have been funny if I wasn't terrified that my entire life was burning to the ground. On the morning of the second day, the heavy steel door clanged open. A guard with a face like chiseled granite stepped in. "Wilson, you have a visitor," she barked. My heart leaped. It had to be my lawyer. Or maybe, just maybe, it was my mother coming to bail me out. Maybe she had finally come to her senses. Maybe she realized that leaving her eldest daughter to rot in jail for a crime she didn't commit was wrong even for her. I was led down a long fluorescent lit hallway to the visitation room. It was a row of booths with thick plexiglass partitions. I sat down, my handcuffs clinking against the metal counter. On the other side of the glass sat my mother, Joyce. She looked small. She was wearing her Sunday church hat and clutching a tissue, dabbing at dry eyes. When she saw me, she let out a theatrical gasp, pressing her hand to the glass. "Oh, Ebony," she wailed, her voice muffled through the speaker. "Look at you. My poor baby, in orange. Lord have mercy." "Mom," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Please tell me you brought bail money. Please tell me you told the police that LaToya is lying." Joyce's expression shifted. The theatrical sadness vanished, replaced by a nervous, shifty look I knew all too well. It was the look she wore when she needed money for a bill she had forgotten to pay. "Well, about that," she started, avoiding my eyes. "It is complicated, baby. The police are talking about child endangerment charges. Serious charges." "I know they are serious, Mom," I snapped. "That is why I need you to tell them the truth. Tell them Kyle set me up. Tell them I called CPS because they abandoned the kids." Joyce sighed, leaning closer to the glass. She lowered her voice as if the guards cared about our family drama. "Ebony, listen to me. LaToya is in the hospital." The stress of all this caused her blood pressure to spike. "The doctor is worried about the baby. If the police investigate her for abandonment, CPS will take all the kids. Do you want that? Do you want your nieces and nephews in foster care with strangers?" I stared at her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't here to help me. She was here to negotiate. "So what are you saying, Mom?" I asked, my blood turning to ice. "I am saying that you are strong," Joyce said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "You are successful. You have money. You have lawyers. If you just take the plea, admit it was a misunderstanding, admit you were stressed and made a mistake, you will just get a fine. Maybe some community service. You can handle that. You can bounce back." She paused, waiting for me to agree. When I didn't, she continued, her voice hardening. "But LaToya, she has nothing, Ebony. If she gets a record, she loses her housing assistance. Kyle loses his disability check. They lose the kids. You have to be the big sister here. You have to protect the family. Just take the fall. For the baby." The silence that stretched between us was louder than the slamming of the jail doors. It was the sound of a bridge burning. It was the sound of the final cord being cut. For 32 years, I had told myself that my mother loved us equally. I told myself that she leaned on me because I was capable, because I was the rock. But looking at her now through the scratched plexiglass, I saw the ugly, naked truth. She didn't love me. She loved what I could provide. To her, I wasn't a daughter. I was a resource. I was an insurance policy. I was an ATM machine that breathed. She was willing to let me have a criminal record, to let me lose my CPA license, to let me lose the career I had built from nothing, just to protect LaToya from the consequences of her own actions. LaToya was the golden child because she needed them. I was the discardable child because I didn't. "No," I whispered. "What?" Joyce blinked, confused. I said no. I said, my voice rising. "I will not plead guilty to a crime I didn't commit. I will not destroy my life so LaToya can keep playing the victim." "Ebony, don't be selfish," Joyce hissed, her true face finally showing. "You have everything." "Why can't you just give a little grace, guard?" I shouted, standing up. "I am done here." As I was led away, I could hear my mother screaming that I was an ungrateful daughter, that I was cold, that I had forgotten where I came from. I didn't look back. I walked back to my cell, sat on the bench, and didn't shed a single tear. I had no tears left for them. I felt light. The heavy burden of trying to buy their love had finally been lifted. 2 hours later, the guard returned. "Lawyer is here, Wilson." I went back to the visitation room expecting a public defender. Instead, I saw a man in a sharp navy suit carrying a leather briefcase that cost more than Kyle's entire wardrobe. It was Marcus Thorne, the top defense attorney in Atlanta, a man I had worked with on several fraud cases. I hadn't called him. "Who hired you?" I asked, bewildered. "Your firm did," Marcus said, opening his briefcase. "When you missed the audit meeting, the managing partner got worried. He saw the news. He knows you, Ebony. He knows you don't miss meetings, and you certainly don't starve children." Tears pricked my eyes. My boss, a man I had only known professionally for 5 years, had more faith in me than the woman who gave birth to me. Marcus pulled out a tablet. "I have been busy. We subpoenaed the carrier records for both your phone and Kyle's." He tapped the screen, showing me a complex log of data. "See this? This is the metadata from the text message Kyle showed the police. The timestamp on the screenshot says 4 o'clock p.m. But the server logs show that no message was sent from your device at that time. In fact, at 4 p.m., your phone was actively using data to download a secure file from your work server." He swiped to the next image. "And this. This is a trace on the spoofing application Kyle used. He is not very smart, Ebony. He used the free version of the app and didn't mask his IP address. We traced the creation of the fake text to an IP address registered to the Wi-Fi at a coffee shop 3 blocks from your mother's house, at a time when your GPS data places you in your office." I looked at the data. It was beautiful. It was irrefutable. It was freedom. "The police have already seen this," Marcus said with a grim smile. "The district attorney is dropping all charges against you. They are processing your release paperwork right now. And Ebony, they are opening an investigation into filing a false police report." When I walked out of the precinct an hour later, the afternoon sun hit my face like a physical blow. The air smelled of exhaust and hot asphalt, but to me, it smelled like victory. I was wearing my wrinkled linen suit, holding a plastic bag with my belongings. I stood on the sidewalk watching the cars rush by. I was free, but I wasn't the same woman who had been dragged out of her house in handcuffs. That woman was a doormat. That woman was a people-pleaser. That woman was gone. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. It had hundreds of missed calls and texts from unknown numbers, probably reporters. I ignored them all. I opened my banking app. My thumb hovered over the screen. I navigated to the sub-accounts. The accounts labeled Mom's Mortgage, Niece's Tuition, and Latoya Emergency Fund. I remembered my mother's voice. "You have money. A fine is nothing to you." I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt cold, calculated precision. I was a forensic accountant. I knew how to stop the bleeding. And this family had been bleeding me dry for a decade. I tapped the settings. Unlink account, confirm. I went to the credit card tab. Authorized users. Kyle Jenkins, Latoya Jenkins. Status active. I hit freeze card, then I hit report lost or stolen, then I hit remove authorized user. One by one I cut the digital umbilical cords, the car payments, the insurance, the recurring transfers. I watched the scheduled payments disappear from the screen. With every tap, I felt lighter. I put the phone to my ear and called the number for the locksmith I used for my office. "Hello, this is Ebony Wilson. I need an emergency rekeying of my residence. Yes, immediately. And I need you to install a biometric lock. No codes. Fingerprint only." I hung up and looked at the precinct one last time. They had tried to lock me up to force me to submit. Instead, they had unleashed the one thing they should have feared most. They had woken up the auditor. And I was about to conduct the most thorough audit this family had ever seen. The war had officially begun. The glass doors of the accounting firm had always been my gateway to validation. For 7 years, walking into that lobby meant I was someone important. I was Ebony Wilson, the partner, the forensic expert, the woman who could find a missing penny in a $1 billion ledger. But as I walked in that Monday morning, the atmosphere had shifted. The receptionist, who usually greeted me with a warm smile and a story about her cat, suddenly found her computer screen incredibly fascinating. Conversations at the water cooler died instantly as I passed. The silence was loud. It was the sound of judgment. I did not even make it to my office. The head of human resources intercepted me in the hallway, her face arranged in a mask of professional pity. She asked me to step into the conference room. I knew what was coming before she even opened her mouth. The viral mugshot. The headlines about child endangerment. Even though the charges had been dropped, the damage was done. In the world of high-stakes finance, reputation is currency, and mine was currently trading at zero. Ebony, we know the charges were cleared, she said, sliding a piece of paper across the mahogany table. But the firm has an image to maintain. Clients are asking questions. We think it is best if you take a leave of absence, indefinitely. Until this family matter is fully resolved, suspended. They called it administrative leave, but I knew what it was. I was being sidelined. The career I had sacrificed everything for, the late nights, the missed holidays, the non-existent dating life. All of it was slipping away because my sister decided to weaponize her uterus, and my brother-in-law decided to play the victim. I walked out of the building carrying a box of my personal effects, feeling a mixture of shame and a burning cold rage. I drove home to the sanctuary that Kyle and Latoya were so desperate to steal. I parked my car, walked up the driveway where the police had dragged me away just days before, and found a stranger waiting for me on the porch. He wasn't a cop, he was a process server, a man in a stained windbreaker who looked bored. "Ebony Wilson," he asked. I nodded, too tired to speak. "You have been served," he said, shoving a thick manila envelope into my chest before turning and walking away. I went inside, locked the door, and ripped open the envelope. I expected a restraining order. I expected another bill. What I found was a civil lawsuit that was so audacious, so twisted, that I actually had to read it 3 times to believe my eyes were not deceiving me. Kyle and Latoya were suing me. The legal header was bold and aggressive. Plaintiffs Kyle Jenkins and Latoya Jenkins versus defendant Ebony Wilson. The cause of action was something called promissory estoppel. I knew the term from my business law classes. It is a legal principle meant to protect people who rely on a promise to their detriment. Essentially, if you promise someone something and they make life changes based on that promise, you can be held liable if you break your word. Kyle had found a lawyer, a bottom feeder named Saul Goodman Wannabe, whose billboards littered the highway to argue a perverse interpretation of this law. The lawsuit claimed that my history of financial support over the last decade constituted a verbal contract. It argued that by paying for their rent, their car, their groceries, and their children's tuition for years, I had created a reasonable expectation of continued support. It claimed that Latoya had decided to have this 7th child based on the reliance that I would help raise it just as I had the others. Therefore, the lawsuit argued my sudden withdrawal of funding was a breach of contract that caused severe emotional distress and financial ruin to a pregnant woman. And then came the demands. I flipped to the last page and gasped. They were demanding spousal support for my sister in the amount of $5,000 a month. They demanded back pay for the emotional damage of the arrest incident. And most insanity of all, they demanded exclusive use and possession of my Buckhead condominium until their youngest child turned 18, claiming that maintaining their standard of living was my legal obligation. They wanted my house. They literally wanted to kick me out of the home I paid for and move in while forcing me to pay them $5,000 a month for the privilege of existing. My phone rang. It was Marcus, my lawyer. He had evidently received a copy of the filing. "Ebony, do not panic," Marcus said, his voice calm but tight. "This is a nuisance suit. It is frivolous. No judge in Georgia is going to enforce a contract for perpetual generosity. They are fishing. They are trying to scare you into a settlement. I know they are, Marcus, I said, staring at the paper until the words blurred. But they are dragging my name through the mud again. This is public record. My firm will see this. We will file a motion to dismiss, Marcus assured me. But Ebony, there is something else. Along with the lawsuit, their lawyer sent over a settlement proposal letter. It is marked confidential. Read it to me, I said, gripping the edge of my granite countertop. Marcus hesitated. It is ugly, Ebony. It is blackmail. Read it. Marcus took a breath. The letter says that if you agree to sign over the deed to the condo and pay a lump sum of $50,000, they will drop the lawsuit and the media campaign. However, if you refuse to settle within 48 hours, they are prepared to release character evidence regarding your moral fitness. Specifically, they plan to go to your family's church and the local press with information regarding a medical procedure you had at the Planned Parenthood on 14th Street when you were 20 years old. The room spun. The air left my lungs. I dropped the phone. The clatter echoed in the empty kitchen. My abortion. I was 20 years old. I was a junior in college working 2 jobs, barely scraping by on scholarship money. The father was a mistake, a fleeting college romance. I knew I couldn't raise a child and finish my degree. I made the hardest decision of my life so that I could build a future, so that I could eventually become the woman who supported this entire ungrateful family. Only one person knew about that. I hadn't told LaToya. I hadn't told Kyle. I hadn't told a soul except for the woman who drove me to the clinic and held my hand while I cried afterwards. My mother, Joyce. The betrayal hit me harder than the handcuffs, harder than the suspension, harder than the lawsuit. My mother, the woman who preached about family values, the woman who judged everyone from her high horse in the choir stand, had weaponized my deepest trauma. She had taken the most vulnerable moment of my life and handed it to Kyle like a loaded gun. She had told them. She had given them the ammunition to destroy me in the one place that still mattered to her, the church community. They were threatening to expose me as a sinner to the congregation. They knew that in our conservative religious circle, this would make me a pariah. They thought the shame would break me. They thought I would scramble to write a check to keep my secret buried. I picked up the phone from the floor. My hand was not shaking anymore. Ebony Marcus asked, his voice filled with concern. Are you there? Do you want me to draft a settlement? We can try to negotiate the amount down. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city skyline. I thought about the scared 20-year-old girl I used to be. I thought about how hard she worked to become me. And then I thought about my mother sitting in her kitchen whispering my secrets to Kyle so he could draft a blackmail letter. No, Marcus, I said, my voice dead calm. No settlement. Ebony, if they release this, let them. I cut him off. Let them tell the church. Let them tell the press. Let them scream it from the mountaintops. They think shame is my weakness. They forgot that I pay the mortgage on the house they are sitting in while they plot against me. They forgot that I know things about them that would make a turbulent past look like a nursery rhyme. I hung up the phone. I went to my safe and pulled out a hard drive. It was labeled Family Taxes Backup. Kyle wanted to talk about history. He wanted to bring up the past. Fine. I had a decade of financial history on this drive. I had proof of every dollar, every lie, and every fraudulent signature. They wanted a war about secrets. They had no idea that they had just declared war on the keeper of the archives. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was going to open the books. And I was going to start with the church they were so worried about. If they wanted to talk about morals, I had a few interesting facts about where the church building fund donation really went when Kyle was the treasurer 3 years ago. I plugged the hard drive into my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the darkening room. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the auditor. And the audit was about to begin. For the first time in 48 hours, I did not feel fear. I did not feel sadness. As I locked the heavy oak door of my home office and engaged the deadbolt, I felt a sensation that was entirely new. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a surgeon preparing to cut out a tumor. They wanted a war. They wanted to drag my reputation through the mud and expose my secrets to the church. They wanted to use the law as a weapon to bludgeon me into submission. What Kyle and Latoya failed to realize was that they had brought a knife to a nuclear fight. They were grifters, petty manipulators who played checkers with people's emotions. But I was a forensic accountant. I played chess with invisible money trails for a living. I closed the blackout curtains, plunging the room into darkness. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and pressed the power button on my surge protector. One by one, my 3 high-definition monitors flickered to life, bathing the room in a cool blue glow. This was no longer my home office. This was the war room. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun and cracked my knuckles. I wasn't Ebony the sister anymore. I wasn't Ebony the daughter. I was the auditor. And the audit was officially open. I started by pulling up my own bank statements from the last 7 years. I exported everything into a master spreadsheet. Every transfer, every Venmo, every check written to Latoya, Kyle, or my mother. The sheer volume of data was staggering. When I looked at the total sum at the bottom of the column, the number made me nauseous, but I pushed the feeling aside. Emotion was a liability. I needed patterns. I filtered the search results for the keyword tuition. For the past 3 years, I had been sending $2,000 a month directly to Latoya's checking account. This was specifically designated for the private Christian academy that the twins Maya and Kai attended. Latoya had cried to me that the public schools were dangerous and that the twins needed a spiritual foundation. I had agreed without hesitation. I opened a second window and logged into a skip tracing database used by private investigators. It allows you to see public records and associations linked to bank accounts if you have the right credentials. I traced the flow of the tuition money. On September 1st, $2,000 left my account and entered Latoya's. On September 2nd, $500 was transferred to the school. I froze. 500. Not 2,000. Where did the other 1,500 go? I followed the digital breadcrumbs. The remaining money was moved to a Cash App account with the username King Kyle Art. From there, it was withdrawn in cash. But where cash withdrawals are harder to trace, but not impossible if you know where to look. I cross-referenced the withdrawal timestamps with the geolocation data I had harvested from Kyle's public Instagram posts. September 2nd. A photo of Kyle holding a cocktail with the caption, "Living my best life." The geotag was the Lucky Star Casino and Resort in Cherokee, North Carolina. I cross-referenced the next month. October 1st. Money in. Money to Kyle. Withdrawal at an ATM inside the Diamond Lounge at the casino. The pattern was identical for 36 months. My hands hovered over the keyboard. They hadn't just stolen my money. That would have been forgivable. They had stolen their children's education. They had taken money meant for books and uniforms and a safe learning environment and fed it into slot machines and blackjack tables. I called the school's billing department pretending to be Latoya. The registrar told me the twins were on the verge of expulsion for unpaid fees and that they had been moved to the part-time program years ago. I felt a fire igniting in my chest, but I banked it down. I needed more. I needed something federal. I turned my attention to Kyle, the man who claimed in his lawsuit that he was a struggling artist who needed my support to survive, the man who claimed he had zero income. I navigated to the Small Business Administration's public database. It is a searchable record of every business that received relief funds during the pandemic. The Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, was designed to help employers keep staff on payroll during the lockdown. It was a lifeline for legitimate businesses, but a honeypot for fraudsters. I typed in Kyle Jenkins. I expected to see nothing. I expected to see zero results because Kyle has never registered a business in his life. He has never sold a painting. He has never employed a soul. The screen refreshed. And there it was. Jenkins Creative Enterprises, LLC. My jaw dropped. The business address listed was my mother's house. The number of employees listed was 5. 5 employees. Kyle couldn't even manage his own hygiene, let alone a staff of 5. I clicked on the loan details. On April 10th, 2020, Jenkins Creative Enterprises, LLC, received a loan of $42,000 for payroll protection. On May 15th, 2021, the loan was marked as forgiven. He had stolen over $40,000 from the federal government. He had invented 5 phantom employees, forged tax documents to prove their existence, and pocketed the cash. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was wire fraud. This was bank fraud. This was a felony that carried a prison sentence of up to 30 years. I sat back in my chair, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. I had him. I could end this right now. I could print this page drive to the FBI field office and hand it to an agent. But something told me I wasn't done. If he was willing to defraud the government, what else was he doing? I looked at the list of employees on his fraudulent loan application. The names were redacted in the public view, but the dates of birth were visible. I squinted at the screen. One of the birth dates looked familiar. August 12, 2014. That was Jaden's birthday. I checked the next one. June 4th, 2016. That was Maya's birthday. A sick feeling coiled in my gut, colder and heavier than before. He hadn't just invented employees, he had used his own children. I opened a new tab. This was the most dangerous door to open. I navigated to a credit monitoring service. As the aunt who had set up savings accounts for all the kids, I had their social security numbers on file. I had never used them. I never thought I would need to. I typed in Jaden's name and social. I expected to see a blank file. A 10-year-old child should not have a credit report. The file should say no record found. The wheel spun. And spun. And then a report loaded. Jaden Jenkins. Credit score 420. I gasped, covering my mouth with my hand. Red flags littered the screen. Delinquent account. Capital 1. Balance owed $3,000. Collections agency. I checked Maya. Same thing. A defaulted car loan in her name. She was 8 years old. I checked the twins. I checked the baby. Every single one of them had a credit file thick with debt. Kyle and Latoya had used their children's identities to open credit cards, take out loans, and buy luxury goods they couldn't afford. They had destroyed their children's financial futures before they even learned to write in cursive. I was shaking now. This was evil. This was a level of predation that I couldn't comprehend. They weren't just parasites. They were cannibals eating their own young. I had enough to bury them. I had enough to send them away for a very long time. I reached for my phone to call Marcus. I needed to tell him to prepare the federal paperwork. But as I went to close the tab for Zion, the youngest toddler, something caught my eye. Zion was only 2. His file should definitely be empty. Even Kyle couldn't be fast enough to ruin a 2-year-old's credit, right? The report loaded. It wasn't empty. There was one active account, opened 3 months ago. But it wasn't a credit card. It was a life insurance policy. A term life insurance policy for $50,000. Beneficiary Kyle Jenkins. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. Why would you take out a life insurance policy on a healthy 2-year-old? And then I saw the transaction history attached to the policy premium payments. The payments weren't coming from Kyle's account. They weren't coming from Latoya's. The payments were being auto-drafted from an account labeled Joyce Jenkins Retirement. My mother. I clicked on the transaction details to see the bank routing number, and that is when the floor dropped out from under me. The account didn't belong to a bank in Georgia. It was an offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. My mother, a retired school lunch lady who claimed she couldn't afford to fix her roof, had an offshore account paying for a life insurance policy on her toddler grandson. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't just fraud. This was a conspiracy. And I had just found the loose thread that was about to unravel the entire tapestry of lies my family had been weaving for decades. I picked up my phone, but I didn't call my lawyer. I called the private investigator I kept on retainer for international asset recovery. "I need you to run a name for me," I whispered into the phone, my eyes never leaving the screen. "Joyce Jenkins. And I need you to find out why a woman who clips coupons has a shell company in the Caribbean." The blue light from my 3 computer monitors hummed in the silent room, casting long, ghostly shadows against the walls of my home office. I had spent the last hour unearthing the kind of financial rot that usually sends CEOs to federal prison. But this was worse. This was personal. I stared at the spreadsheet I had created, a digital map of my brother-in-law's fraud. The fake business loan, the gambling debts disguised as tuition payments. It was enough to put Kyle away for a decade. But my forensic instinct, that nagging voice in the back of my head that had made me the youngest partner at my firm, told me I was not done. I had found the how, but I had not fully uncovered the depth of the damage. I opened a new browser window, my hands trembling slightly for the first time that night. I navigated to the Equifax consumer portal. In my top drawer, tucked inside a velvet pouch, was a list of social security numbers. I had collected them years ago, one by one, as each of my nieces and nephews was born. I had been the proud auntie who wanted to set up 529 college savings plans for them. I wanted to give them the head start I never had. I never imagined that those 9-digit numbers would become the keys to a house of horrors. I started with Jaden. He was 10 years old, a sweet boy who loved dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist. A 10-year-old child is a ghost in the financial system. If you run a credit check on a minor, the result should be a blank page. It should say, "No record found." That is the only acceptable result. I typed in his name, Jaden Isaiah Jenkins. I typed in his social security number. My finger hovered over the enter key. I took a deep breath, praying to a god I wasn't sure was listening anymore, begging for the screen to stay blank. I pressed enter. The loading icon spun, and spun, and then the screen refreshed. It was not blank. A credit score flashed in bold red numbers. 420. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a scream. A 420 credit score is not just bad. It is catastrophic. It is the score of someone who has defaulted on everything they have ever touched. But Jaden was 10. He didn't have a job. He didn't have a wallet. I scrolled down to the trade lines, my eyes burning. There were 3 credit cards opened in his name, a Discover card with a $5,000 limit maxed out, a Visa from a predatory subprime lender maxed out, and a store credit card for a high-end electronics retailer currently in collections. The account opening dates went back 4 years. They had started stealing his identity when he was 6 years old. I felt physically ill. I grabbed the trash can next to my desk and dry-heaved my body, rejecting the reality on the screen. Kyle and LaToya hadn't just neglected their children. They had cannibalized them. They had looked at their firstborn son and saw a fresh credit line. I forced myself to sit back up. I wiped my mouth and turned back to the keyboard. I had to know the full extent. I had to check them all. I typed in the twins, Maya and Kai. 8 years old. Maya had a defaulted auto loan in her name, a $30,000 loan for a Dodge Charger. A car she couldn't drive for another 8 years was currently listed as a repossession on her permanent record. Kai had utility bills in his name, electric, gas, cable, all past due, all sent to collections. They were using an 8-year-old boy to keep the lights on because they had burned their own credit to the ground. I went down the list, typing faster and faster, fueled by a cold, dark rage. The 4-year-old, the 3-year-old, even the toddler Zion. Every single one of them had a credit file. Every single one of them was drowning in debt before they had even learned to read. I pulled the data into my master spreadsheet, tallying the total. I highlighted the column and clicked sum. $152,430. I stared at the number. It wasn't just money. It was their future. Kyle and Latoya had effectively murdered their children's opportunities. When Jaden turned 18 and tried to get a student loan for college, he would be rejected. When Maya tried to rent her first apartment, she would be denied. When they tried to get jobs that required background checks, they would be flagged as financial risks. Their parents had shackled them with a lifetime of poverty before they even had a chance to start the race. This was not just bad parenting. This was financial incest. It was a violation so profound it made my skin crawl. I printed the reports, the printer whirred in the corner spitting out page after page of evidence. These weren't just documents anymore. They were indictments. I sat back in the dark, listening to the rhythmic sound of the printer trying to calm my breathing. I thought about the lawsuit they had filed against me. They claimed I had a moral obligation to support them. They claimed they needed my house for the children. The audacity was blinding. They didn't want my house for space. They wanted my house because they had nowhere else to go. They had burned every bridge, maxed every card, and stolen every identity available to them. I was the last host organism they hadn't fully drained yet. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the ringing of the landline phone on my desk. I frowned. Nobody called this line. I used it strictly for business faxing, and recently for a trap I had set up. When I started this investigation 48 hours ago, I had used my skills to access my mother's phone carrier account. I knew she was the weak link. I had set up a conditional call forwarding protocol. If her home line was busy or went unanswered for 6 rings, the call would divert to my secure office line. I looked at the caller ID. It was a generic toll-free number, but the prefix was for a major mortgage lender. It was 8:00 p.m. Debt collectors and loss mitigation departments work late. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear, staying silent. "Hello?" A woman's voice sounded tired and impatient. "Is this Mrs. Joyce Jenkins?" I pitched my voice slightly higher, mimicking the breathless, anxious tone my mother used when she was cornered. "Speaking," I said. "Mrs. Jenkins, this is Sarah from the Loss Mitigation Department at Apex Home Loans. We have been trying to reach you by mail and phone for weeks. We haven't received a payment on the mortgage in 9 months." My grip on the phone tightened. 9 months. My mother told me the house was paid off. I had given her the money to pay it off 5 years ago. "Mrs. Jenkins." The woman continued when I didn't answer. "Look, I am not calling to collect anymore. That window has closed. I am calling to inform you that the foreclosure process has been finalized. The sheriff's sale is scheduled for next Tuesday at the county courthouse." Tuesday. That was 6 days away. "You have until Monday at 5 p.m. to vacate the premises," the woman recited from a script. "If the property is not vacated, the sheriff's department will execute an eviction order on Wednesday morning." Do you understand? I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was the final piece of the puzzle. This was why they were so desperate. This was why they staged the abandonment. This was why they filed the lawsuit demanding my condo. They weren't just greedy, they were homeless. They had been living in a house that was already lost, spending money they stole from their children, hoping to bully me into giving them a soft landing before the sheriff kicked them to the curb. "I understand," I said to the woman, my voice dropping back to my own cold professional register. "Thank you for the information, Sarah. You have been very helpful." "Wait, is this Mrs. Jenkins?" the woman asked, confused by the sudden change in tone. "No," I said. "This is the new owner." I hung up the phone. I looked at the calendar on my wall. Next Tuesday. Kyle and Latoya thought they were playing a game of chicken with me. They thought they could scare me with secrets and lawsuits. They didn't know that I was the one holding the stopwatch. They had 6 days left in that house. 6 days before their world completely imploded. And I wasn't going to warn them. I wasn't going to save them. I was going to buy the banknote. I opened a new email and typed in the address of my contact at the bank's Asset Recovery Division. Subject line: Distressed Asset Purchase Offer. I attached the foreclosure notice I had just pulled from the public record. I typed one sentence. "I want to buy the debt on this property, and I want the eviction authority transferred to me immediately." I hit send. I swiveled my chair around to look at the photo of my nieces and nephews on my bookshelf. Jaden's smiling face looked back at me. "Don't worry, baby," I whispered to the photo. "Auntie is going to get your credit score back. And I am going to make sure the people who did this to you never sign a financial document again." The audit was over. The execution phase was about to begin. The glow of the computer screen was the only light in the room, illuminating my face as I stared at the digital foreclosure notice. My hand was still resting on the receiver of the landline, the dial tone humming a monotonous note that matched the numbness spreading through my chest. The woman from the bank had thought she was talking to my mother, Joyce. She thought she was delivering the bad news to a confused elderly woman who had simply fallen behind on her bills. She had no idea she had just handed the smoking gun to the one person capable of firing it back. I hung up the phone slowly. My mind was racing, connecting dots that had been scattered for months. The desperation, the sudden need for my condo, the lawsuit claiming they needed stability. It all made sense now. They were not just greedy, they were drowning. They were 6 days away from being homeless, and instead of asking for help, they had decided to steal my home to replace the one they had destroyed. I navigated to the Fulton County Deed Recorder's website. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to see the signature. 5 years ago, on my mother's 55th birthday, I had handed her a check for $85,000. It was every cent of my bonus that year. I told her to pay off the remaining mortgage on the family home. I wanted her to be free. I wanted her to never worry about a roof over her head again. I remembered the way she cried. I remembered the way she hugged me and thanked God for blessing her with a daughter like me. She had framed the deed release letter and hung it in the hallway. I typed in the address, 422 Maple Street. The search results populated. There were 2 liens on the property. The first was the original mortgage marked paid in full 5 years ago. That was my work. That was my sacrifice. But right below, it was a new entry, a second mortgage home equity line of credit, dated 18 months ago. The lender was a predatory subprime company known for high interest rates and aggressive foreclosure tactics. I clicked on the document image. The PDF loaded slowly, revealing the scanned pages of the contract. My eyes scanned past the legal jargon to the numbers. The loan amount was $150,000. $150,000 of equity stripped from the house I had paid to save. And there, at the bottom of the last page, was the signature, Joyce Jenkins. Her handwriting was shaky but unmistakable, and right below it, as a witness, Kyle Jenkins. I felt a wave of nausea. My mother had taken the house I gave her, the symbol of her security, and leveraged it to the hilt. But where did the money go? My mother didn't buy fancy clothes. She didn't travel. She didn't renovate the kitchen. I opened my spreadsheet again, looking at the timeline. 18 months ago. That was right around the time Kyle started talking nonstop about cryptocurrency. I remembered him at Thanksgiving dinner pontificating about how working a 9 to 5 was for suckers and how he was going to be a crypto billionaire. He had called himself a visionary. He had mocked my steady paycheck. I opened a new tab and searched for the crypto wallet address I had found earlier in his email trash folder. I plugged it into a blockchain explorer. The transaction history told the whole tragic story. 18 months ago, a deposit of $140,000. It was almost the entire loan amount. He hadn't even given my mother a cut. Then a series of reckless trades. He bought obscure coins with names like Moondog and Rocket Share. He bought at the peak. And then the market crashed. I watched the balance plummet. 100,000, 50,000, 10,000, 0. In 6 months, Kyle had vaporized my mother's home. He had taken 30 years of equity and burned it on digital nothingness. And my mother had let him. She had signed the papers. She had gambled her security because she believed in his delusions more than she respected my sacrifice. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silence. The anger I felt wasn't hot like fire. It was cold like liquid nitrogen. It froze my heart. It froze my sympathy. For the last 2 days I had been wondering why my mother turned on me. Why she sided with the people who were ruining her life. Now I knew. She wasn't just protecting Latoya. She was protecting her own shame. She couldn't admit to me that she had lost the house. She couldn't admit that she was stupid enough to let Kyle hustle her out of her retirement. So instead of coming to me for help, she joined their plot to steal my condo. She decided it was better to rob Peter to pay Paul, even if Peter was her daughter, who had already saved her once. I looked at the foreclosure date again. Next Tuesday, the sheriff's sale. Usually when a house goes to foreclosure, investors swarm like vultures to buy it cheap. The family gets kicked out, the bank takes the loss, and strangers move in. But I wasn't a stranger. And I wasn't just an investor. I was a shark who smelled blood in the water. I picked up my phone. It was late, almost 9 o'clock, but the man I needed to call never slept. His name was Mr. Henderson, a senior asset manager at the bank that held the bad note. We had worked together on a fraud case last year. He owed me a favor. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. Ebony Wilson, his voice boomed. To what do I owe the pleasure at this hour? Are you uncovering another Ponzi scheme? Something like that. Mr. Henderson? I said, my voice steady. I need to talk business. I am looking at a distressed asset in your portfolio, a property on Maple Street. I heard the clicking of a keyboard on his end. Ah, yes, the Jenkins file. That one is a headache. We are taking it to auction next week. Why do you have a client interested in flipping it? I don't have a client, I said. I am the buyer. There was a pause. You? Ebony? This is a tear down in a D-grade neighborhood. Why would you want this toxic debt? Because I have a personal interest in the eviction process. I said, choosing my words carefully. I want to buy the note. I want to own the debt. And I want the transfer of ownership executed immediately. I will wire the full amount, plus the outstanding penalties, first thing tomorrow morning. Mr. Henderson let out a low whistle. You want to buy the mortgage so you can stop the foreclosure? You are a saint. Ebony. Bail out a family member. I laughed, a short, dry sound that had no humor in it. No, Mr. Henderson. You misunderstand me. I don't want to stop the foreclosure. I want to be the one who enforces it. The line went silent. He understood. In the world of finance, possessing the note meant possessing the power. If I bought the debt from the bank, I became the bank. I became the landlord. I became the sheriff. I can have the paperwork drawn up by noon tomorrow. Mr. Henderson said, his voice dropping to a professional whisper. But Ebony, once you sign that paper, you are the one putting them on the street. Are you sure you want that kind of blood on your hands? I looked at the mugshot of me that was still open in a browser tab. I looked at the credit reports of the children whose futures had been stolen. I looked at the second mortgage deed signed by my mother. They drew first blood, Mr. Henderson, I said softly. I am just cauterizing the wound. Send the papers. I hung up the phone. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights of Atlanta. Somewhere out there in that house on Maple Street, my family was probably sleeping, dreaming of moving into my condo, dreaming of spending my money, dreaming of getting away with it. They thought they had 6 days left. They thought they were fighting a bank that didn't care. They didn't know that by tomorrow afternoon, the wolf wouldn't be at the door. The wolf would own the door. And I was going to make sure that when I knocked, they would remember exactly who they tried to destroy. I went back to my desk and opened a new file. I named it Eviction Strategy. The audit was complete. Now it was time for collections. The art of forensic accounting is not just about numbers. It is about psychology. To catch a thief, you have to understand what motivates them. You have to know what makes them tick. And in the case of my family, the motivation was simple. It was not survival. It was envy. They did not just want my money. They wanted my submission. They wanted to see the successful independent sister brought down to their level. They wanted to see me beg. So to spring the trap I had spent all night designing, I knew I had to give them exactly what they wanted. I had to give them the performance of a lifetime. I sat in my darkened office, the glow of the monitors casting long shadows on the walls. I took a deep breath, reaching for the phone. I closed my eyes and summoned every ounce of exhaustion, fear, and desperation I had felt over the last 48 hours. I thought about the handcuffs. I thought about the mugshot. I let the tears come not from sadness, but from a calculated need to sell the lie. I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice guarded. "Hello, Mom," I choked out, letting my voice crack. "Mom, please, you have to make them stop." Ebony Joyce asked, her tone shifting instantly from suspicion to a predatory kind of concern. "What is wrong? They suspended me, Mom," I sobbed, gripping the phone tight. "The firm saw the lawsuit. They saw the article about the arrest. They are talking about revoking my CPA license. I can't lose my license. It is my whole life." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear her smiling. I could hear the relief washing over her. She thought she had won. "Well, baby, I told you," she said, her voice dripping with that fake church lady sweetness. "I told you that you were fighting a losing battle. Family is supposed to support each other. When you turn your back on your blood, God has a way of humbling you." "I know," I whispered. "I know. I was wrong. I was just so stressed. Please tell Kyle not to go to the church. Tell him not to release that story about what happened when I was 20. I can't handle that shame, Mom. Not now." Joyce sighed, a long, dramatic sound of a martyr accepting an apology. "I can talk to him, Ebony. But you know Kyle. He feels very disrespected. He feels like you spit in his face. If you want this to go away, you have to make it right. You have to show them you are serious about being part of this village." "I will, I promised. I will give them whatever they want. Just tell them to drop the lawsuit. I am coming over tonight. I am bringing the paperwork." "Good," she said. "Come for dinner. We are having a celebration." I hung up the phone and wiped my face. The tears vanished instantly. The mask of the broken woman fell away, revealing the cold, hard stare of the auditor. They were having a celebration. They were throwing a party in a house that was 6 days away from being seized by the sheriff. They were feasting on the edge of a cliff, and they were too arrogant to look down. I went to my closet. I bypassed the tailored suits and the silk blouses. I chose an old pair of sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt. I washed my face, leaving it bare. I pulled my hair back into a messy ponytail. I needed to look defeated. I needed to look like a woman who had lost everything. I grabbed the thick manila folder from my desk. Inside were the documents that would seal their fate. But on top, I placed a distraction. A draft of a deed transfer, a checkbook, the bait. I drove to my mother's house in silence. The sun was setting, casting a blood-red glow over the suburbs. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the foreclosure sign had not been put up yet. The bank was waiting for the legal process to finish next Tuesday. My family still thought they were secure. I walked up the path, the same path where I had been arrested 2 days ago. I could hear music thumping from inside. Laughter. The smell of barbecue ribs wafted through the air. It made my stomach turn. They were partying while I was supposedly losing my career. I opened the door and walked in. The scene that greeted me was grotesque. The dining room table was piled high with food. Expensive takeout containers from a high-end steakhouse littered the surface. Bottles of champagne were open. Kyle was sitting at the head of the table, my father's old seat, holding a glass of bubbly. Latoya was next to him, wearing a new dress that I recognized from a designer website, likely bought with another fraudulent credit card in her child's name. My mother was fussing over them, refilling their plates. The music stopped when they saw me. Ebony Kyle shouted, spreading his arms wide. "Look who decided to crawl out of her ivory tower." I kept my head down, hunching my shoulders. I walked into the room, slowly clutching the folder to my chest like a shield. "I brought the papers," I said softly. Latoya smirked, taking a bite of a rib. "You look terrible, sis." "Rough couple of days, I just want this to be over," I said, looking at my mother. "Mom, you said if I came you would stop the leaks. You said you would make them drop the case." Joyce walked over and patted my cheek. Her hand felt cold. We are a family, Ebony. We don't want to hurt you, we just want you to do your share. Sit down. Have a rib. Kyle paid for it. I knew he hadn't. He had paid for it with money stolen from the government or his children, but I nodded. I sat at the far end of the table away from them. I didn't eat. I just watched them. They were high on power. They thought they had finally broken the stallion. They thought they had tamed me. So Kyle said, leaning back in his chair and picking his teeth. Let's talk terms. You agree to sign over the deed to the condo fully paid off. You agree to the $5,000 a month stipend for LaToya's distress. And in exchange we act like none of this happened. We tell the lawyers it was a misunderstanding, and your little secret from college stays buried. I opened the folder. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking from the adrenaline of the kill. I have the transfer documents here, I whispered. But I need to be sure. If I sign this, you promise to leave me alone. You promise not to ask for more? Kyle laughed, a cruel barking sound. Ebony, once we have the condo, we won't need you. We will be living the life we deserve. You can go back to your sad little accounting job and visit us on holidays. If we invite you. He reached out his greasy hand. Give it here. I hesitated, pulling the folder back slightly. One more thing, I said. The mortgage on this house. Mom, you told me it was paid off. But I saw some mail. Kyle slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Don't you worry about this house, he yelled. This house is fine. This is our business. You just worry about signing over yours. You see, this is your problem, Ebony. You always think you are smarter than everyone else. You think because you have a degree you can look down on us. But look at you now, sitting in your sweatpants begging us for mercy. LaToya chimed in, rubbing her belly. It is really for the best, Ebony. The twins need their own rooms. And with the new baby coming, we need stability. God wanted us to have that condo. He just used you as the vessel to pay for it. The delusion was breathtaking. They truly believed that God was blessing them with the fruits of my labor because they were special. They didn't see the theft. They didn't see the fraud. They only saw what they felt they were owed. I pushed the folder across the table. Okay, I said. You win. Kyle grabbed the folder like a starving dog grabbing a bone. He ripped it open. He saw the deed transfer document on top. He didn't even read the fine print. He didn't see the other documents underneath, the ones that were not about the condo, but about the affirmation of debt and guardianship. He was too blinded by greed. He pulled a pen from his pocket. He looked at me with a grin that was pure evil. See, he said, clicking the pen. Isn't it better when you are obedient? Just sign right here on the dotted line, and you can have 3 days to move your stuff out. We want the keys by Friday. The dining room was silent, save for the wet smacking sound of Kyle licking barbecue sauce off his fingers. I watched him with a detached fascination, like a scientist observing a particularly greedy lab rat. He wiped his hands on a napkin, leaving greasy smears that matched the stain on his shirt, and reached for the pen I had placed on the table. The manila folder lay open between us. To him it looked like a victory lap. To me it looked like a death warrant. I held my breath, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. The document on top was the deed transfer for my condo, the bait that had lured them into this false sense of security. But underneath that, stapled firmly to the back, was a document titled Affidavit of Financial Responsibility and Guardianship. It was a standard-looking form filled with dense legal jargon that I had drafted myself just 3 hours ago. Wait, I said, my voice trembling with a fake anxiety that made Kyle pause. Before you sign the deed, the lawyers need you to sign the financial affidavit first. Kyle groaned, rolling his eyes at LaToya. See? She always has to complicate things. Just give me the house, Ebony. It is for your protection, Kyle. I lied, clasping my hands together on the table. Since I am transferring a high-value asset to you, the IRS needs proof that you have a demonstrated history of managing family finances. This document just certifies that you and Latoya are the sole guardians of the children, and that you have been exclusively responsible for all financial accounts opened in their names for the past 5 years. It proves to the bank that you are capable of handling the condo fees. I pointed to a specific paragraph I had highlighted in yellow. See, it says here that you, Kyle Jenkins and Latoya Jenkins, affirm under penalty of perjury that you are the primary and only users of all credit banking and loan accounts associated with the Social Security numbers listed below. I had listed the Social Security numbers of all 6 children. If Kyle had half a brain, or if he wasn't blinded by the prospect of moving into a $500,000 penthouse, he would have stopped. He would have realized that signing this document was a confession. It was a sworn statement admitting that every fraudulent credit card, every defaulted car loan, and every identity theft crime committed under those children's names was done by him. He was claiming ownership of the debt. He was claiming ownership of the crime. But Kyle didn't read the paragraph. He barely glanced at the numbers. He just saw the condo keys dangling in front of his face. Yeah, whatever, Kyle muttered. We raise the kids. We pay the bills. We do everything while you sit in your office. I will sign your little paper if it shuts you up. He pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound was loud in the quiet room. He signed his name with a flourish, a big looping signature that took up way too much space. Latoya, you too, he said, shoving the paper toward my sister. Latoya hesitated for a second, a flicker of instinct passing behind her eyes. Is this going to affect our welfare check? She asked, looking at me suspiciously. No, Toya, I said softly. This is a private document for the deed transfer. It just shows you are good parents who take care of your kids' business. That was the trigger phrase. Good parents. Latoya thrived on the delusion that she was Mother of the Year. She smiled, picked up the pen, and signed her name right next to Kyle's. Now, Mom, I said, turning to Joyce, I need a witness. Since you live here, and you have watched them raise the kids, you need to sign here, attesting that this information is true. My mother looked at the document. She looked at Kyle, who was already reaching for the champagne bottle to refill his glass. She looked at me, seeing the defeated daughter in the sweatpants. She wanted this to be over. She wanted her house back. She wanted peace. She picked up the pen. I am only signing this so we can move forward. Ebony, she said, her voice stern. I hope you learned your lesson. Family sticks together. She signed. The trap was snapped shut. The lock was turned. The key was thrown away. I watched the ink dry for a split second before I reached out and took the folder. I didn't snatch it. I moved slowly, deliberately. I closed the cover, enclosing the confession inside. I placed the folder into my tote bag and zipped it shut. The sound of the zipper was the only sound in the room. So Kyle said, raising his glass, When do we get the keys, Friday? Or can we start moving boxes tomorrow? I stood up. I rolled my shoulders back, shedding the hunch I had adopted when I walked in. I wiped the fake tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. I lifted my chin, looking down at them from my full height. The transformation was instant. The broken, scared sister was gone. The forensic accountant was back. You can start moving boxes whenever you want, I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of the whine I had used earlier. But you won't be moving them into my condo. The room went deadly silent. Kyle lowered his glass. Latoya stopped chewing. My mother frowned, confusion clouding her eyes. Excuse me? Kyle laughed nervously. We just signed the deal. You gave us the papers. I gave you an affidavit. I corrected him, my voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. An affidavit where you just swore in front of a witness that you are the ones who opened the credit cards in Jaden's name. You just admitted to opening the car loan in Maya's name. You just confessed to federal identity theft, wire fraud, and bank fraud. Kyle stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. What the hell are you talking about? Give me those papers back. I took a step back, gripping my bag. No, Kyle. You signed them. They are legal documents now. And do you know what the penalty is for identity theft of a minor? It is 15 years per count. And since you stole from 6 children, well, you can do the math. Or maybe not. You never were very good with numbers. Ebony, my mother shouted, standing up and slamming her hands on the table. Stop this right now. You are scaring your sister. Give him the papers. I looked at my mother with cold, dead eyes. And you, Mom, you just signed as a witness. You just confirmed that you knew. You knew they were stealing the kids' futures. And let's not forget the second mortgage you signed on this house. The one you tried to hide from me. My mother's face went gray. She collapsed back into her chair, gasping for air. How? How do you know about that? She whispered. I know everything I said. I know about the casino withdrawals. I know about the fake PPP loan. I know about the offshore account for the life insurance policy on Zion. I audited you, all of you, and you all failed. Latoya started to cry, but this time it was real tears. Panic tears. Ebony, please, she wailed. I am pregnant. You can't do this to a pregnant woman. You should have thought about that before you stole my money and tried to steal my home, I said, walking toward the door. Kyle lunged at me. He was fast fueled by rage and alcohol. He grabbed the strap of my bag, trying to rip it from my shoulder. Give it to me, you witch! I will kill you! I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I just looked at the hallway behind him. Officer, I yelled. The front door, which I had left unlocked, flew open. 2 large uniformed police officers stepped into the hallway. I had texted them the moment the signatures were dry. I had told them I was coming to a hostile environment to retrieve stolen property and requested a civil standby. They had been waiting on the porch for my signal. Get your hands off her, one of the officers shouted, hand on his taser. Kyle froze. He let go of my bag, stumbling back, his hands raising instinctively. He looked from the police to me, his eyes wide with a terror I had waited years to see. Ma'am, are you okay? The officer asked me. I am fine, officer, I said, smoothing my shirt. My brother-in-law was just getting a little emotional about the news I delivered. I was just leaving. I walked to the door, stepping past the officers. I paused at the threshold and looked back at the dining room table. The feast was cold. The champagne was flat, and my family looked like ghosts haunting their own funeral. Oh, and Kyle, I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. You asked when you should move boxes. I would suggest tonight. The bank sold your mortgage debt today. The new owner is very strict about evictions. I turned and walked out into the night air. It was crisp and cool. I walked to my car, tossed the bag with the confession into the passenger seat, and started the engine. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening in that house. The screaming, the blaming, the collapse. I finally felt safe. I finally felt clean. I drove toward the highway, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold. The investigation was closed. The evidence was secured. But the punishment was just getting started. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. I have the signatures, I said when he answered. File the police report and call the FBI. We are ready to go to war. I drove away from my mother's house with the windows down, letting the cool night air rush over my face. It should have felt like an escape, but I knew it was merely a tactical retreat. On the passenger seat next to me, inside the unassuming leather tote bag, lay the piece of paper that was worth more than my condo, more than my bank account, and certainly more than the hollow relationships I had just severed. It was the affidavit, the confession, the death warrant for Kyle and Latoya's life of crime signed in their own arrogant handwriting. My phone, which was connected to the car's Bluetooth, shattered the piece immediately. It was Kyle. I had been out of the driveway for less than 5 minutes. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I had to play the part of the beaten sister just a little longer. Hello? I said, keeping my voice flat and tired. Ebony. I am refreshing my banking app and I don't see the deposit, Kyle barked. You said you were transferring the $50,000 for the settlement. Where is it? I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. His greed was a bottomless pit. He had just threatened my life, assaulted me, and forced me to sign over my home, and he couldn't even wait 10 minutes for the cash. Kyle, it is $50,000, I said, forcing a sigh. I can't just Zelle that kind of money. It has to go through a wire transfer. My bank flagged it because it is an unusually large amount for a personal account. Flagged it? What do you mean, flagged it? His voice rose to a panic. You are stalling. If you are stalling, Ebony, I swear to God, I will drive to the church right now. I am not stalling. I lied smoothly. I authorized it. But because it is after business hours, the Federal Clearinghouse won't process the wire until the markets open tomorrow morning. It takes 24 hours. You will see it by 9 a.m. tomorrow. There was a silence on the other end, heavy with suspicion. I could hear him breathing, likely looking at LaToya, calculating if I was telling the truth. 9 a.m. Kyle hissed. If it is not there by 9:01, I am coming for you, and I won't be alone. He hung up. I disconnected the phone and threw it onto the seat. I didn't go back to the condo immediately. I drove to my office building, the one place where I knew I was untouchable. I went up to the 24th floor, not to work, but to wait. I scanned the affidavit. I emailed the digital copy to Marcus, my lawyer. I emailed a copy to the FBI agent Marcus had connected me with earlier that day. I emailed a copy to the fraud department of every credit card company listed on the children's credit reports. Then I sat in the dark and watched my phone light up. For the next 12 hours, Kyle unleashed a campaign of digital terror. At 11 p.m., you better not be playing games. At 1 a.m., LaToya is crying. She thinks you are tricking us. Tell her you aren't. At 2:30 a.m. I know where you sleep. I didn't reply to a single one. My silence was the canvas upon which he painted his own paranoia. He was unraveling. He was realizing that the victory had been too easy, that the surrender had been too quick. The alcohol was wearing off, and the reality of his desperation was setting in. At 3:45 a.m., my security app alerted me to movement at my condo. I pulled up the live feed on my laptop. The grainy night vision camera showed a dark figure stumbling up my walkway. It was Kyle. He was drunk or high or just manic with fear. He walked right up to the front door and jammed his key into the lock. It didn't turn. I watched him twist it violently. He rattled the handle. He kicked the bottom of the door. Open up, Ebony. I know you are in there. He backed up and looked at the windows. He picked up a garden stone from the flower bed, weighing it in his hand. He was going to break the glass. He was going to break in and force me to make the transfer. But before he could throw it, a floodlight blinded him. From the shadows of the garage, a massive figure stepped out. It was the private security guard I had hired immediately after leaving the precinct. He was 6'4", an ex-military contractor who didn't have a sense of humor. He stood with his arms crossed, a taser holstered visibly on his hip. "Can I help you, sir?" the guard asked, his voice deep and rumbling like thunder. Kyle dropped the rock. He shielded his eyes from the light, stumbling back. I live here," Kyle stammered. "My key isn't working. My sister-in-law, she is inside." "Nobody is inside, sir," the guard said, taking a step forward. "And the owner of this property has instructed me that anyone attempting to gain entry is to be considered a trespasser. You have 5 seconds to leave the premises before I detain you for police transport." Kyle looked at the guard. He looked at the new biometric lock on the door that glowed an angry red. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the power dynamic had shifted. He wasn't the predator anymore. He was a nuisance. He spat on the driveway. "Tell her she is dead." He screamed at the camera, knowing I was watching. "Tell her I am coming back with a lawyer." He stumbled back to his car and peeled away. I closed the laptop. I didn't sleep. I watched the sun come up over the Atlanta skyline, turning the gray buildings to gold. I watched the clock on the wall tick down. 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 8:30 a.m. At 8:45 a.m., my phone rang. It was Kyle again. "Where is the money, Ebony?" "I am at the bank. They say there is no pending transaction." I picked up the phone. It was time. "Kyle," I said, my voice calm and bright. "You are right. There is no pending transaction. I canceled it." "What?" he screamed. "You signed the papers." "I signed the affidavit, Kyle. I didn't sign the deed transfer." "You didn't check the folder before I left, did you? You were too busy drinking my champagne. You, I am not giving you $50,000, Kyle. I am not giving you my house. And I am not giving you another dime for the rest of your life. But don't worry, I did send something. I sent a very special package to Mom's house. It should be arriving right about now." I hung up the phone. I switched my audio input to the open line I had established on my mother's landline phone. I put on my headphones, closing my eyes to listen. I heard the background noise of the house. I heard LaToya yelling at the kids. I heard the TV blaring cartoons. And then I heard it. The sound of heavy vehicles pulling up onto the gravel. Not one car, many cars. I heard car doors slamming in unison, the sound of boots hitting the pavement. It sounded like an army. Then a pounding on the door that shook the receiver. "FBI, open up!" I heard my mother scream. I heard LaToya shriek. I heard the sound of the front door being breached by a battering ram because nobody opened it fast enough. Federal agents get on the ground, hands where we can see them. I heard the chaos, the confusion, and then I heard the voice I had been waiting for. "Kyle Jenkins, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. LaToya Jenkins, you are under arrest for conspiracy and child endangerment." I listened as the cuffs clicked. I listened as they read them their rights. I listened as the house of cards built on lies and the stolen futures of innocent children finally collapsed under the weight of the truth. I took off the headphones. I stood up and walked to the window. The city looked beautiful. The air in the office was recycled and cold, but for the first time in my life I could breathe. I was no longer the sister. I was no longer the daughter. I was the one who survived. And now I had a foreclosure sale to attend. The sound of a battering ram hitting a solid oak door is something you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. It is a thud so heavy and final that it shakes the very foundation of a house. From my position in the driveway, standing behind the wall of black SUVs, I watched as the front door of my mother's house gave way. It splintered inward, exposing the rot inside to the bright morning light. The screaming started instantly. It wasn't the angry, entitled screaming I had heard from my family for the last decade. This was the shrill, panicked screaming of people who suddenly realized that their delusions of grandeur offered no protection against federal agents in tactical gear. I walked slowly up the driveway. My heels clicked against the pavement, a steady rhythm beneath the chaotic shouting of orders. I saw neighbors peeking out from behind their curtains, the same neighbors who had watched me get arrested just days ago. But this time, they weren't looking at a monster. They were looking at justice. Inside the foyer, the scene was a masterpiece of chaos. Kyle was face down on the carpet, his hands zip-tied behind his back. The arrogance that had fueled his text messages to me all night had evaporated. He was sobbing, his face pressed into the dust, shouting that he had rights, that this was a mistake, that he knew people. An FBI agent stood over him unimpressed, reading him his rights in a monotone voice that cut through Kyle's hysteria like a knife. LaToya was in the corner of the living room, surrounded by two female officers. She was using her pregnancy as a shield, clutching her stomach and wailing that the stress was hurting the baby. But these officers knew the file. They knew that the real danger to that baby wasn't the arrest, but the mother who had stolen its identity before it was even born. They didn't coddle her. They handcuffed her gently but firmly, informing her that a medical team was waiting outside to evaluate her before transport. I stepped through the broken doorway. The air smelled of stale champagne and fear. Kyle lifted his head. His eyes were red and swollen. When he saw me standing there looking immaculate in my blazer holding my phone, his expression shifted from fear to a pure, unadulterated hatred. "You!" Kyle screamed, straining against the agent holding him down. "You did this! You witch! You set us up! Tell them, Ebony! Tell them this is a family dispute! Tell them to let us go!" The room went quiet. The agents looked at me. My mother Joyce, who was standing by the kitchen entrance trembling in her bathrobe, looked at me with desperate hope. She thought I was there to save them. She thought I was going to pull out my checkbook and make the bad men go away. I walked over to Kyle. I looked down at him, not with anger, but with the cold detachment of an auditor closing a bankrupt file. "I can't tell them to let you go, Kyle," I said, my voice calm and clear, "because I am the one who gave them the evidence." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The recording from the dining room filled the silence. Kyle's voice, arrogant and slurred, echoed off the walls. "We raise the kids. We pay the bills. We do everything while you sit in your office. I will sign your little paper if it shuts you up." I paused the recording. "Do you remember that, Kyle? You claimed full financial responsibility. You claimed you were the sole operator of those accounts." I reached into my bag and pulled out the affidavit he had signed just 12 hours ago. The ink was barely dry. I held it up so he could see his own loopy, greedy signature. And this, I continued, stepping closer. "You signed a sworn statement admitting that every credit card, every loan, and every fraudulent transaction made under Jaden's name, under Maya's name, under Zion's name was done by you. You admitted to identity theft. You admitted to wire fraud. You admitted to stealing over $150,000 from your own children. This piece of paper isn't a receipt for a condo, Kyle. It is your confession." Kyle's face went white. He realized the trap. He realized that his greed had blinded him to the fine print. He slumped against the floor, the fight draining out of him. Latoya started screaming at me from across the room. "How could you? I am your sister. My kids need me. Your kids need protection from you," I shot back, my voice finally rising. "I checked their credit reports, Latoya. I saw the debts. I saw the defaulted loans. You ate their futures. You treated them like livestock. And you, Kyle? You stole $40,000 from the government with a fake business loan using their social security numbers as employees. That is federal prison time." The agents hauled Kyle to his feet. As they dragged him out the door, he looked back at my mother. "Joyce, do something. Tell her to stop this. It is her fault." My mother stood frozen. She looked from her daughter in handcuffs to her son-in-law being shoved into a federal vehicle. She looked at the wreckage of her living room. Her hands shook violently. She took a step toward me, her eyes pleading. "Ebony, baby, please," she whispered. "This has gone too far. They are family. Just tell the officers it was a misunderstanding. We can fix the money. I will sell the house. I will pay it back. Just don't let them take the baby." I looked at my mother. The woman who had betrayed me. The woman who had taken out a second mortgage on the house I paid for and gave the money to a con artist. The woman who had an offshore account paying for a life insurance policy on a toddler. "You can't sell the house, Mom," I said softly. "What?" She blinked, confused. "Of course I can. It is my house. I will sell it and hire a lawyer." "No, Mom. You don't own this house anymore." I reached into my bag again. I pulled out a document stamped with the bank's official seal. It was the transfer of debt notification. "You stopped paying the mortgage 9 months ago," I explained, watching the realization dawn on her face. "The bank foreclosed on you. The sheriff was scheduled to evict you next Tuesday. You were living on borrowed time and hiding it from me so you could steal my condo." My mother grabbed the counter for support. "But I can fix it. I will talk to the bank. The bank doesn't own the debt anymore, Mom, I said. I do. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I bought the note this morning, I continued. I bought the mortgage. I bought the liens. I am the bank now. And as the new owner of this property, I have made a decision about the tenants. Ebony. Don't, she gasped. I walked to the window and watched the police car drive away with my sister inside. I am enforcing the eviction, Mom, immediately. The police officer standing near the door stepped forward. He held a paper in his hand. Mrs. Jenkins, since the new owner is present and has requested immediate possession due to criminal activity on the premises, you have 24 hours to vacate. You need to pack only your personal essentials. Anything purchased with illicit funds stays here as evidence. My mother collapsed onto the sofa. She looked around the room at the family photos, at the life she had built on lies. She looked at me, waiting for me to crack, waiting for the dutiful daughter to come back and fix it. But that daughter was gone. She had been arrested on her own front porch. She had been humiliated, and she had been reborn in the fire of their betrayal. I am not doing this to be cruel, Mom, I said, turning to leave. I am doing this because you taught me that actions have consequences. You chose them. You chose the fraud. You chose the lies. Now you have to live with the result. I walked out of the house, past the broken door, past the crying neighbors. I didn't look back. I had one more stop to make. I had to go to the courthouse. I had to file the petition for emergency custody of the two eldest children. I wasn't going to let them disappear into the system. I was going to give them the one thing their parents never did: a chance. As I got into my car, I saw my mother standing in the doorway, a small defeated figure in a bathrobe watching her world crumble. I put the car in drive. The rearview mirror reflected only the road ahead, and for the first time in years the road was clear. The gavel came down with a sound that signaled the end of an era for the Jenkins family. It was not a loud bang, but a dull, final thud that echoed through the sterile air of the federal courtroom. I sat in the back row, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, watching the backs of the two people who had shared my DNA, but never my values. Kyle and Latoya wore matching orange jumpsuits, stripped of their designer clothes and their arrogance. The judge, a woman with a face carved from granite, looked down at them over her spectacles with undisguised disgust. Bail is denied, she stated, her voice cutting through Latoya's soft weeping. Given the defendants' access to offshore accounts and the heinous nature of the financial crimes committed against their own minor children, this court considers both defendants a significant flight risk and a danger to the community. You will remain in federal custody until trial. As the marshals moved in to shackle them, Kyle turned to look at me one last time. There was no fire left in his eyes, only a hollow, terrifying emptiness. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to curse me or beg me, but the heavy metal door closed behind him before he could utter a sound. They were gone. But the silence they left behind was filled with a much more complicated problem: the children. The custody hearing at family court the following week was the hardest day of my life. I walked into the room prepared to fight, but also prepared to accept the limitations of my own reality. There were 6 children, soon to be 7. I was a single woman with a demanding career. I knew that trying to be a savior to all of them would only result in me failing everyone. I had to be strategic. I had to be surgical. The caseworker from Child Protective Services looked exhausted. She had a file on her desk that was 3 inches thick. "Ms. Wilson," she said, looking at me with sympathetic eyes, "the state is prepared to take custody of all 6 minors. Given the parents' incarceration, they will be placed in the foster system immediately. It is unlikely they will be kept together." I took a deep breath. I thought about Jaden, 10 years old, who already knew his credit score was ruined. I thought about Maya, 8 years old, who flinched when adults raised their voices. They were old enough to remember the trauma. They were old enough to be damaged, but young enough to be saved. The younger ones, the toddlers, they were resilient. They needed care, yes, but they did not need deprogramming in the same way. "I will take Jaden and Maya," I said, my voice steady. "I petition for full legal guardianship of the 2 eldest children. The caseworker blinked. And the others, I have contacted a cousin in South Carolina, I explained, sliding a folder across the desk. She is a school teacher. She has a large home and a husband who works from home. They are willing to take the 4 younger children, and I have set up a trust fund to cover every cent of their expenses. Clothing, food, education, therapy. I will pay for it all. But I cannot raise 6 children alone. It was a compromise. It was a heartbreaking calculation. But when the judge approved the order, I knew I had made the right choice. Jaden and Maya moved into my condo that night. They walked in carrying garbage bags filled with their clothes, looking around my clean, quiet home like they had landed on a different planet. Meanwhile, across town, another eviction was taking place. The sheriff's deputies arrived at my mother's house at 9 in the morning. I wasn't there, but my security team sent me the video. Joyce Jenkins, the matriarch who had enabled a decade of fraud, walked out of her home for the last time. She didn't leave with dignity. She left with 3 cardboard boxes and a plastic bag full of shoes. The neighbors, the ones she had tried so hard to impress with her lies about her wealthy son-in-law, stood on their porches and watched. They saw the truth. They saw a woman who had gambled her security on a con artist and lost. She didn't move into a condo. She didn't move into a guest room. With her credit ruined by the foreclosure and her income limited to a small Social Security check, she moved into a subsidized efficiency apartment on the other side of the city. It was a single room with a hot plate and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. I paid the deposit and the first 6 months of rent. That was my final act of charity. I blocked her number the day she moved in. But the tragedy wasn't over. 3 months later, I received a call from the prison infirmary. Latoya had gone into labor. There were no balloons. There was no baby shower. There was no husband holding her hand. Latoya gave birth to her 7th child, a baby boy, while handcuffed to a hospital bed with a correction officer standing guard at the door. I went to the hospital not to visit her, but to see the child. I stood behind the nursery glass and looked at the innocent life that had been used as a pawn before he even took his first breath. He was beautiful. He was perfect. And he was alone. Latoya was returned to her cell 2 hours after the birth. The baby was taken by the state. Because of the severity of her crimes against her other children, the judge had already terminated her parental rights for the newborn. He went straight into the foster system. I stood in the hospital parking lot, the summer heat beating down on the asphalt, and I cried. I cried for the baby who would never know his mother. I cried for the sister I had lost years ago to greed. But mostly I cried because the cycle was finally broken. That baby would never have his identity stolen by his parents. He would never be a credit mule. He would have a chance, a hard chance, but a chance nonetheless. I got into my car and drove home. Jaden and Maya were waiting for me. We had homework to do. The seasons changed, and with them, the landscape of my life shifted in ways I never expected. It has been exactly 1 year since the day the FBI raided the house on Maple Street. The house itself is gone now. I didn't keep it. I didn't rent it out. I sold it to a developer who bulldozed it to the ground. Watching that excavator tear through the roof where I had grown up, where I had been told I wasn't good enough, where my mother had plotted against me, was the most therapeutic moment of my life. The dust settled and the lot was cleared. The physical manifestation of my family's dysfunction was erased from the earth. With the proceeds from the sale, I didn't buy a new car or a vacation home. I started the Clean Slate Foundation. It is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping minors who are victims of familial identity theft. We provide forensic accounting services to clean up their credit reports, legal aid to fight creditors, and therapy to help them understand that their parents' debt is not their burden. I walked into my office this morning, not as a suspended employee, but as a senior partner. The firm not only reinstated me, but they also used my story as a case study in ethics and resilience. My client list is full, my reputation is bulletproof, but the work I am most proud of happens at my kitchen table. I came home early today. The condo is different now. It is not the pristine museum like sanctuary of a lonely workaholic. There are sneakers by the door. There is a science project on the counter. There is life. Jaden is sitting at the table, his head bent over a math textbook. He is 11 now. The shadows under his eyes are gone. Last week we received a letter from the credit bureaus. His record is clean, the debt is gone. He is just a boy again. Auntie Ebony, look, Maya says, running up to me with a drawing. It is a picture of a house. Not a big house, but a happy one. The stick figures in the front are holding hands. It is beautiful, baby, I say, kissing her forehead. I sit down with them, helping Jaden with his fractions. The silence in the room is comfortable. It is safe. There is no screaming. There is no manipulation. There is no wondering if the person sitting next to you is plotting to steal your wallet. For a long time, I thought family was a biological imperative. I thought I had to endure the toxicity because we shared the same blood. I thought setting boundaries was an act of betrayal. But as I look at these two children who are thriving because I finally had the courage to say no, I realize the truth. Family is not about whose DNA you carry. It is about who carries you when you are weary. It is about who respects your existence. It is about safety. My mother, Kyle, and Latoya are still in my past, locked away in their cells and their small, sad apartments. They chose their path. They chose to feed off others until there was nothing left. They were the tumors that were killing us. And sometimes to survive, you have to cut the tumor out. You have to endure the pain of the surgery, the scars of the recovery, and the phantom ache of what used to be there. But once it is gone, you can finally heal. You can finally live. I look at the camera, my voice steady and strong. If you are watching this, and you are holding on to a relationship that hurts you just because you share a last name, let this be your sign. You are allowed to let go. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to lock the door. My name is Ebony Wilson. I am an auditor. I am an aunt. And for the first time in my life, I am free. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to make a hard choice to save your own future, let me know in the comments below. Please like and subscribe and share this with someone who needs to know that their worth is not negotiable. Until next time, protect your peace and check your credit report.